you've got to run all the processes and deal with all the shareholder issues, the various stakeholder issues. Of course, that's part of the day job. But I think it's really dangerous for a CEO when he loses sight of what actually the company's trying to do.
All too often, size becomes a disadvantage. Outside, insurgents start to run circles around us. Inside, the endless meetings and PowerPoint slides, well, they start to destroy our souls. What about those pesky customers? Well, they feel more like a distraction from our urgent meetings or change management seminars. And of course, horizontal activities matter because that is where the benefits of scale come from. But they are not enough. We must also remain maniacally vertical. We've got to keep our connection directly with our customers and the front line that serves them. How? Well, perhaps the answer lies, I don't know, in courting plumbers, catching lightning, or maybe even putting a man on the moon. I'm Jimmy Allen, and this is the Founder's Mentality, the CEO Sessions. And today we're speaking with David Haines. He's CEO of the Flora Food Group. His career spanned across founder-led companies like Mars, fast tech startups like Vodafone in the early days, and large companies like Coke. He then moved into private equity-backed companies, first serving as CEO of GROHE for almost a decade before taking the helm at Flora. Across industries and continents, David has built brands by staying vertical, connected to customers in the front line. And that mindset is something that he's been working on, well, since his teenage career as a cheesemaker.
So I started my frontline belief, I suppose, pretty early. When I was a young teenager living in Somerset, I started working in supermarkets. I worked on the shop floor of a factory when I was a student, making cheese in Ilminster. And of course, in my early days in my career, I was in sales and learned the power of talking to customers and what I would call real people. But I think the defining moments really came later, when I was in my mid-20s, when I joined Mars Incorporated on the pet food side in Germany. And I had the very, very good fortune of being in a situation which was quite unique, right? I joined in 1989, and it was just as the Berlin Wall was coming down. And so suddenly we had 17 million new consumers that we had to market and sell our products to, get distribution with. Shops in East Germany were not a great big, large Walmart. They were a little 50 square meter, if you were lucky, mom and pop, by and large. So they couldn't take the whole range. And so there was no point in us doing stuff that worked in the West Germany. You had to do stuff that worked in East Germany. And the only way you could do that was going over there and talking to people. And all had to be organized. Which products were we going to sell? How were we going to advertise? I mean, people have been seeing advertising for years, I suppose, but how are we going to focus our distribution, get our sales forces there, get it all built? So it was like very pioneering to have suddenly this country, had the same name. I was about to say same language, but it wasn't even exactly the same language. And it's certainly a different cultural history. So it was just, through all of that. And the other thing, right, was I was very fortunate in those early days to meet the owners of Mars Inc., John Mars and Forrest Mars. I remember presenting to John as a 29-year-old. Candidly, I was very nervous. I mean, he was the owner of one of the largest companies in the world. Given that we turned the sales around of what we were doing in my brand, which was called Chappie back in the day, dog food, it went fine. A few months later, John came back for another visit and somehow asked him to go for a walk through the car park with me. And when I came back, my boss asked me, so what job did he offer you? And I don't know, we just got on. And I think he also liked the enthusiastic frontline focus of what we were trying to do with his brands.
What's interesting about those stories is we often sit in boardrooms and talk about how our consumers experience our brands. And then there's the reality of in the front line, the actual experience is very often driven not by what the brand owner wants, but what the stores want, the recommenders in between, et cetera. You must have taken that experience to Vodafone.
But when I got hired by Julian Horne-Smith and Chris Chen, my task was global brand director, and my task was to create a global brand within 3 years. And we went about it, and we defined the positioning, and we worked out a vision of where we wanted to get to. But we all had to do with intangible assets. So suddenly we had to migrate these 250 brands under the one Vodafone brand, right? Across basically all parts of the world. And we had partner markets and we had direct markets like here in Germany. So we created a vision for the brand, what we wanted the brand to stand for. We thought about the tools, but of course, you had to change the name in the screen, you had to change the service, but you had to change the stores. There were thousands of stores branded other things across Europe. And we had to think about things like with the new phones that were coming out, we had to put people in the stores to get them to put 5 names of your friends in the phone because it seems inconceivable today. But back then, just getting your friends' names into the phone so you could talk with them spontaneously wasn't available. And Chris and Julian were inspired, I believe, in many ways, to bring in someone with consumer goods experience to try and do this, to create this brand. And we achieved what we wanted, but we had some great tools, right? We had a great, simple idea. Often the best marketing ideas, first of all, these global jobs, you can only win with great ideas. You don't win with great PowerPoint. You have to have great ideas based on a strong strategy and insight. Ours was ask a simple human question. How are you? How you doing? Because how you're doing is the beginning of every conversation. And that simple insight that we tried to then bring to life through various, advertising tools. The Dandy Warhols who did the music went on to do a number one. We sponsored Formula One, sponsored Ferrari. We tried to make our brand the most relevant brand of the day. And I think people would say back then we achieved our objective.
I love this idea of relevance and the pride you took. And I totally agree that for its moment, at the beginning of the mobile industry, Vodafone was probably the most relevant brand. And so I just even love to go back to that one idea. How did you get a retailer to help a consumer put in 5 names in a mobile phone?
The retailers all were those days interested in selling handsets. Their whole raison d'etre was to sell more handsets. And so the idea of having more modern handsets, and I don't know if you remember, we came up with this concept called Vodafone Live. It was the first flip phone with a Sharp. And we pointed out to these retailers, right, the way you sell a new handset is to offer new services that then did not exist. And it may seem crazy today in 2025 that the service was to put in 5 names so you could talk a bit more, but everything has to start somewhere, right? And it did start with that simple service. So, it was really exciting, completely irrelevant in 2025. So relevance to the consumer is all about the here and now. As we say in the world of private equity, we have to play the ball as it lies, not how we'd like it to lie.
If you're not the most relevant brand in the room, you're invisible. Incumbents lose to insurgents because PowerPoint slides become more important than customers. They lose their obsession with the full customer experience. That's every retailer, every gatekeeper, every single hand between you and the end customer. What David did was simple. He brought data. He showed the retailers that if they wanted to sell more high-margin handsets, they needed to help consumers use all the features on the phone. One initiative, walk out talking. Get the consumer to put the numbers of friends and family in their phone, and guess what? They call friends and family from their phone. He wasn't just shifting boxes, he was creating experiences. And guess what? David did it again with Vodafone Live. And again, you have to remember how long ago this was, where combining Vodafone's network with a shiny new Sharp handset and a suite of services transformed the mobile industry. The result? 1.5 million customers in 7 months, and Vodafone went from just another mobile operator to the most relevant brand in mobile. And that's vertical focus. It isn't just thinking about how your product or ad leaves your office. It is caring deeply about how it hits the customer. Now, in 2004, David entered the private equity arena, this time as CEO of GROHE. And armed with a vertical mindset and a frontline focus, he had a single goal: revive that brand.
GROHE was a great trademark, available mainly in Europe, but it was not a great brand. It didn't have a brand essence, really, other than quality, a little boring, but reliable. So that was a good platform off which we could build. So my predecessors had done a good job. And we created what we used to call real relevant innovation that we thought consumers would pay a premium for, because our big danger was the Chinese and cheap imports, which would copy our designs very quickly. As you're selling these products primarily through what we would call today an influencer could be a plumber. Your faucet's broke, you're having a new bathroom, the plumber will come around and recommend something, or an architect, if you're doing it with an architect, or an interior designer, all 3 influencers. We tried to come up with this concept called moments of truth. What was the point that made us different, special, and better than the alternative, expressed in a consumer-friendly way? So, for example, the core benefit, as it turns out, of GROHE was what they called the cartridge in the middle of the tap, which made it move very softly and very gently. And by the way, also when it's 30 years old. This concept of silk move was born. Another one that we had in our thermostats, we had cold water run around the outside, so that you didn't scald yourself on the hot water on the inside. The moment of truth was called cool touch. And it was a concept that suddenly, very simply, gave the plumber, the architect, the designer, a reason to recommend our products to the consumer. And hey, yes, GROHE may be a little bit more expensive, but in the end, you're getting a true, relevant consumer benefit.
The story of GROHE is amazing. I want to pause for a moment to give people context. There was a massive influx of Chinese goods selling often at 60, 40, 20% of the price that a good GROHE product would sell. And a lot of people from the outside were advising you, buddy, you're at the wrong end of this market. It's about to commoditize. And the CEO has a choice. I accept that or I fight it and recommit to the differentiation that's our product. And I think Moments of Truth is this great idea that you introduced that said, let's assert our right to be premium and help the consumer understand why. And I think it's so easy for CEOs at that moment to give up on their category.
I went there with a mission. The private equity industry was renowned at the time for the ability to cut costs. But growth, I think it's fair to say, without offending anybody, was not one of their strengths. We wrote the manifesto to grow and cut costs. And the only way we could grow was to reframe the brand, give the consumer benefits and reasons to pay the premium, moments of truth, and do that over time with great design. And that's kind of what we did. And by the way, the plumber, in the end, was easy to convince, because the plumber, certainly in this, wasn't really interested in selling cheap Chinese stuff, because he or she knew 6, 9, 12, 18 months later, the consumer would be calling them back, asking them to break open their walls, because guess what? Wasn't working or leaking. And so actually, in the end, there was a consumer insecurity that we could, of course, reassure with a quality brand. As I said, our predecessors did a good job building a reputation for quality. We brought design and moments of truth and reasons to believe into that. And so we were able to build on that and create this lifestyle brand, which went truly global.
What I love about David is that he's a straight shooter. Real growth doesn't come from cutting costs. It comes from finding those moments of truth with the customer. And someone else who knew this incredibly well was Adrian Gore, founder and group CEO of Discovery. In the early 90s, when Discovery mostly was focused on health insurance, South Africa faced a crisis, a lack of doctors, high levels of disease, and strict regulation. Gore's mission was clear: make people healthier and safeguard their lives. But his masterstroke was to flip the insurance model. Rather than just covering illness, he set out to prevent it. He launched Vitality, a program that promotes healthier choices. Its promise: if you get healthier and make it cheaper for us to cover you, we'll share the benefits. Eat well, work out, get rewards. This shared value model, healthier customers equal stronger profits, became Discovery's growth engine. And it worked. Discovery expanded beyond South Africa and is now in more than 40 markets worldwide. That's vertical orientation. Study what your customers are doing and find out new ways to help. By the way, my producer's going to kill me on this, but I got to tell you guys a fun fact. So about a decade ago, I was doing a founders forum in South Africa. And Adrian Gore from Discovery was there, but so too is Robbie Broza, the legendary founder of Nando's. And it turns out both of them had gone to the same primary school at the same time and took the same bus number 4. And in my calculation, that bus driver has created more founders than any other bus driver on earth. Come on, prove me wrong. The stories of Vodafone, GROHE, and Discovery are about the same thing. Understand your customer needs and make something insanely relevant to them. And that's not just a lesson for telecom or taps. Our next guest, Iona Gaskell, who develops artist identities at Abubilla Music, puts it even more starkly. Before you can connect with fans, you need to know exactly who you are. It's a conversation. At Vodafone, David began with a simple slogan: how are you? For Iona, the starting point's deeper. Who are you?
My role is head of artist voice as well as outreach. So that is both working with artists when we first sign them to help them and us figure out who the hell they are as an artist. And the first step of what we're trying to do is build their artist manifesto. So we try and create a kind of keystone document that articulates a mission statement and their values and, the characteristics that feel most core to them that they want to communicate with the world, and also the interesting frictions within that personality that are actually what makes them unique.
You're talking about what are conflicts inherent with them, or what did you mean by that?
In that initial discovery phase, there's often a pattern emerges that there are a few conflicts and tensions within their character. If as a label we came along and said, you can't be both a sort of like really thoughtful, intellectual, activist artist and also a goofy, playful nerd. We might say you have to pick one or the other, smooth out those contradictions, but in doing so you flatten the surface and you create something too smooth and impenetrable that doesn't have the eccentricities and quirks that actually make interesting people and interesting art.
In business, we'd say, where does the customer come into all this brand development? In your artist voice work, kind of where do the fans come in?
Well, fans are obviously so important to artists, but you can't make art via focus group. What I think is really important is starting with them figuring out so strongly who they are, and then what is the world that they're trying to build around their art. And it's into that world that we want to invite people in and find the people who are going to love it there. It probably means that there are going to be other people who hate it. You don't want to build an artist world that everybody thinks is kind of fine, because that way you're not going to really find your people that you really want to be in dialogue with through the music that you're making.
What has been your learning once that artist actually starts creating music and releasing it into that world?
We have found that it tends to be that you then need to start adjusting. An example I can give is an artist that I've worked with. They had an idea of everything they put out being incredibly highly curated and intentional and kind of high production value, very glossy. And so for the first set of releases, that's what we went with. We sort of planned those kinds of pieces of storytelling. And they did okay. But the thing that landed was a 3-minute video that they just recorded on their phone when they were kind of mad about something. Like they'd seen something that pissed them off and they just recorded a reaction to it that through which their real character came through. It was speaking to these topics that they really felt were underrepresented, but there was an immediacy in it that is what really resonated with people. So much work has to go into laying that groundwork. Then it's kind of like catching lightning. You cannot predict the moment that the lightning bolt is going to strike. You just have to be really prepared so that when it happens, you can respond with your full, authentic self. And that is what will make that moment be the catching lightning or the moment of truth. That's what will make it be real.
It's that phrase again, moments of truth. For Iona, it's when an artist's music not only reaches the audience, but truly resonates with that audience. And for David, it's when a product proves why it's different, why it's special, why it's better, and does so in a way that the customer really understands. Different worlds, but same concept. It's kind of the moment people get it. But once you've sparked that moment, the hardest act of leadership is keeping it alive. Because your success means you grow, and that grow means the pull of horizontal starts taking you outside the window where you're looking at customers and back into those internal meetings, back into the endless seminars. So the question for David was, how do you stay vertical, connected to the customer, when the pull of complexity keeps dragging leadership sideways?
I've always worked since I've been in leadership positions with these manifestos. And you've seen over the years manifestos for GROHE, you've seen them for Flora Food Group in various versions. What is a manifesto? A manifesto tries to say, what is our true vision? What is our purpose? What is our mission? What are our annual targets? What are our values? What are we good at? What are we not good at? And what are our key imperatives broken down into actions? I try and always ask the question, what's the equivalent of the Kennedy put a man on the moon and bring him back safely by the end of the decade when he went to NASA in 1963? And so I've always tried to do that, create a very clear purpose for our organizations. And at the end, the consumer is always in the middle, because what's business about? It's about selling more stuff to more people more often at the end of the day. And so as a CEO, I think it's very important that you stay on this vertical focus, have the voice of your customer in discussions that you're talking about. And yes, of course, you've got to run all the processes and deal with all the shareholder issues, the various stakeholder issues. Of course, that's part of the day job. But I think it's really dangerous for a CEO when he loses sight of what actually the companies are trying to do. I pilgrimage over regularly to Bentonville in Arkansas to talk to the guys at Walmart or talk to the German retailers. I was down in Cologne recently talking to Eva. Yes, of course, I still do that because I learn so much, right? And we invite our customers to our customer experience center where we show them our culinary products and we try and point out how relevant they are and how this is not just a simple then tap company, now margarine company. What we're offering is solutions to problems with moments of truth, with relevant brands, with relevant products, with relevant ideas. And so there is a red thread through these manifestos of relevance, purpose, vision, mission. I'm a big believer in values. And again, at Flora Food Group, we have 3 values: performance, passion, and care. Clearly, we're a performance-driven organization, but we're also a caring organization. We saw that, how important that was through COVID and the like. And I think as you get older, you learn a bit, right? Hopefully, when you hang around good people. If you're not stupid, you do pick up the odd thing.
What do you want the new 25-year-old David to get from the manifesto?
If I think back to the mid-1980s, I was inspired by John, Forrest Mars, and in fact, many of the other Mars leaders with whom I'm still friends. And why was I inspired? I believed in what the company was trying to do. I believed in their values. I believed in the bigger picture. And if my manifestos, our Flora Food Group manifestos, can deliver the same inspiration with where the company's trying to go, with what we're trying to do, if I can inspire young men and women to sign up and come with us on that journey, and they can find their home in that environment, right, which is a performance-driven one. And let's be clear about it. A performance-driven organization is not for everybody. And by the way, I'm also very clear about that. It's not a judgment of someone if they don't want to go for it. But frankly, we like people who want to play the top of the Champions League. And if you don't want to, that's fine. But please go and play somewhere else. That's okay.
How do you connect with those young men and women that you're trying to inspire, what's the process by which you talk to them?
Well, still, I try and walk the talk, right? I still visit shops and I still do a what is called a red is good call, where the people down in the organization are invited with myself and our HR director once every quarter. There's groups of 8 to tell us what they think about the company that's not working. We're not interested in the stuff that is working. That's easy. But what would they improve? What's their advice? And it's quite hard, right? Because a lot of people don't want to open up. They don't want to bring bad news. But I'm very fortunate to work with an outstanding chief financial officer at Flora, Florence Navinair, and she's always on the case and requesting, hey, bad news does not age well. Let's get it out on the table. We got a chance of fixing it. And so we have all the formal stuff, but I think the informal stuff where you just talk to people is even more important. By the way, having 2 kids, are in their early 30s and in the business world doesn't do any harm either, and get their pretty honest feedback, which they both love to give me frequently.
I bet, yeah.
So stay connected, right? And stay humble. There's one thing over the years, I suppose, is to stay down to earth. Stay humble, stay on the ground, talk to people, stay normal, and create an environment where people are okay to tell you the truth.
So, David, this vertical orientation, this time that you're committing, these red is good. Most CEOs will also say, God, if I only had the time and energy to do that stuff. So what gets in the way of your vertical orientation? What do you have to fight?
You have to fight the calendar, where everyone's trying to get in the calendar of all the various stakeholders that I'm involved with. As you mentioned, I've been CEO now in private equity financed organizations. The shareholder management is a big part of it in PE. Setting expectations, reporting, discussing issues, getting advice. I'm also very fortunate. I've got an outstanding chairman, a gentleman called Sir Roger Carr, a veteran of British industry. There's the shareholder management. There's the other stakeholders, the organizational processes, there's permanent reviews, but they are all part of the day job. What I do is try and spend time I think you would call it deep work in Bain speak, thinking about how we stay true north of what we're trying to do, this vertical thing, consumer orientation. And for that, I often get accused of being the optimist in the room, right? But I think you have to, in the CEO role, where are we trying to go? What's our vision? What are we going to do the next 3 months, 6 months? But what are we going to do in 3 years? Because, if I don't do that, then it won't happen because everyone else is getting consumed by delivering this week's, this month's, next quarter's numbers, which is right, by the way. I mean, that's our job. I had a world global call only yesterday with our top 100 leaders. And there I was preaching, of course, deliver our FC06 for 2025. Because now's the time you have to remind everybody of that. Now is not the time for fancy vision stuff. There's also, let's be honest, there's a time and a place for everything. So in the end, what are the crown jewels of an organization that I work in? I always think there are two. There's, of course, the brands, which you inherit in whatever state they are, and you try and leave whenever you leave in a better state when you pass the baton on. But the older I get, the more you realize it's actually all about the other crown jewel as well, the people. And I know this is an old cliche, so forgive me for it. Surround yourself with outstanding people. So, and I have an optimistic disposition, thank God. I didn't choose it, it kind of happened. And I do think in these roles, because they are, the other thing I would say, right, these CEO roles, and I try and point it out at home, they are seriously lonely.
Why is it lonely?
You're making tough decisions that affect thousands of people's lives at times. At GROHE, the restructuring that we had to do when we walked in, we had to let a lot of people go. It was front page news in the German press with the whole locust debate, It's pretty lonely when you get death threats, when you have a book written about you, which is still published, by the way, in Germany, to have you killed. That's pretty lonely. When you're dealing with very deep personal issues of your colleagues that you know about in their personal lives. Over the years together, we've seen many tough situations, whether it's health issues, personal issues, career issues, and to stay focused and optimistic in the organization when everyone's looking at you all the time and looking not at you, but what you do, what you say, how you act, how you behave. It's you're always on. That's why you need to be surrounded by also at home and in your personal life, hobbies, activities, and an infrastructure that has nothing to do with your business card.
I think this is the most underrated yet vital trait of great leaders. It's the courage to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to talk about the things that no one else dares mention. David said it, the CEO job can be lonely. I mean, a lot of things you can't share. There are a couple decisions that only you can make, and everybody wants your energy, but very few feel it's important to give you their energy. I love that David walks the talk. It's his openness and honesty that then can spark real adult conversations in those red is good meetings. And it's what turns a manifesto, which could so easily just be words on a wall, into something people can live by. And if you want more stories of CEOs really telling it like it is, check the link in our show notes. And now back to David with some rapid fire questions. What brings you energy?
I love to build brands. Take a brand, whatever state it's in, sort it out, move it forward, and get it healthy. It's a real kick.
So what drains you of energy?
Yeah, shareholders who have what I call master of the universe-itis.
I know what you're talking about. Do you have energy vampires in your work?
You always have some energy vampires, and it's often difficult to find them, but you got to find them. And I use a simple methodology, what I call the skill will matrix. Our HR gang hate it because they think it's far too simple. But it's, skill on the x-axis, will on the y-axis, and just plot where everybody is. And clearly, bottom left-hand corner, frankly, no point in having a long conversation. Deal with high skill but low will, serious conversation, and actually the most dangerous. So you either need to get them on board or out. Low skill, high will, train. High skill, high will, let them loose.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
It's a simple one. Given to me by a French, very successful businessman when I was 28 years old and was having my first child. Take your family out for lunch every Sunday. Your kids can't run off to the bedroom when you try and have a conversation. Your wife doesn't have to spend the morning, or you have to spend the morning in the kitchen cooking, and you actually get some good food.
Okay, let's recap some of our key takeaways from today's episode.
You don't win with great PowerPoint. You have to have great ideas based on a strong strategy and insight. Ours was ask a simple human question. How are you? That simple insight that we tried to then bring to life through various, advertising tools. We tried to make our brand the most relevant brand of the day.
No matter how big the organization, great leadership still comes down to one thing: never losing sight of the customer. I mean, do you measure your day in slides or conversations with customers and the people that serve them?
The moment of truth was called Cool Touch. And it was a concept that suddenly, very simply, gave the plumber, the architect, the designer, a reason to recommend our products to the consumer.
You've got to win across the whole ecosystem. Guess what? It doesn't actually matter how ideas leave your office. What matters is how they hit the customer.
I've always tried to do that, create a very clear purpose for our organizations. And at the end, the consumer is always in the middle, because what's business about? It's about selling more stuff to more people more often at the end of the day.
To stay vertical, David keeps returning to the mission, to the manifesto, to the relentless customer focus. It's connection with the front line, but it's also how you act every day. Are you humble? Are you normal? And do you create an environment where people are empowered to tell the truth? It's easy at the beginning. Every new customer is a huge victory. Every sale is a reason to celebrate. But as our businesses scale, these events aggregate into numbers. The millions of conversations that lead to millions of dollars in sales, well, they happily live in spreadsheets and stop echoing in our hallways. Your success is the result of you being relevant, of being edgy, of mattering to the customer more than any other offer. But it's that very success which creates complacency and a slow drift towards irrelevancy. So how does a company keep its edge? And how do you find the energy to stay relevant year after year after year? Well, in our next episode, we're going to talk to Pedro Arndt. He's CEO of dLocal and former CFO of Mercado Libre. And he's going to be talking to us about what it means to stay relevant through a period of hypergrowth. So we'll see you in the next episode. And until then, stay curious.